I'm Heather Lende, and this is the bookstore on Main Street in Haines. Come on in and let's start the event.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, Amy. This is really exciting. I love your beautiful store, and thank you so much for hosting this.
Heather. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Hospice of Haines fundraiser. I'm Amy Kane, owner of the bookstore in Haines, and I'm delighted to be here with a sneak preview of Heather Lende's latest book of Bears and Ballots. We've made it super easy to donate to Hospice of Haines by following the link fineartalaska.org. Please do, so that they can continue the important work of taking care of our elders here in Haines. If you go to fineartalaska.org, there will also be a link to purchase your very own autographed copy of Heather's book from the Haines bookstore. So without further ado, let me introduce Heather Lende, who most of us already know, but in case you're not familiar with some of her loftier accolades, she has contributed writing to NPR, New York Times, National Geographic Traveler, Women's Day, Alaska Dispatch News, and of course, our local paper, the Chilkat Valley News. And here to interview Heather today is the owner of the Chilkat Valley News, Kyle Clayton. This interview will take about an hour, and at the end, you will see that link to fineartalaska.org again, and it will also be visible in the chat. So hello, Heather and Kyle. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks, Kyle. Why don't you wave, Kyle, so everybody can see you? And I really appreciate you all being here. It's a little odd to be introducing a new book in these times, and that are so challenging, painful, between protests and illnesses. I do think that there are some lessons in my book, and I hope that it inspires you to run for office or get involved in your own local community and government, because I think that even when we make decisions on a national and state level that are supposedly good and offer change, a lot of times public health or systemic racism continues at a local level, and in the small decisions that we make that add to a lot of bigger things. So in light of these times too, I was trying to think of what I could do that is different than what I usually do, aside from listening and reading and learning more about my own complicity in some of these things. But I also want to do my part to address some of the racism and injustice in Haines. And I talked to Ted Hart from the Chilkoot Indian Association today, and he said that what really I can do is to remind you all that we are speaking to you today from Chilkoot Kwan, and that is both proper and right to acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, and to thank you for being here in the Tlingit language, Gunukchish. And again, I apologize if I flubbed the pronunciations. And I also want to say, before I get started, that the content of my book and the viewpoints that I express in it, and also today during this event, do not necessarily reflect the viewpoint of Hospice of Haines, its board of directors, the staff, and the volunteers. And I want to thank you for donating to Hospice of Haines at this time. I linked it to the book only because it's an organization that I care deeply about. And like many local nonprofits, the funding is down in the time of COVID. Our rummage sale this spring didn't happen. There's no pie booth at the fair. There's no checkpoint at the bike race. And so if you're able, it would be nice to donate. And again, I just want to make sure that you know that there's not a connection between my book, because it's a political book, and hospice. It's just something that I care about. So I want to let you know that. And I think, if it's okay, I'll introduce the book a little bit, since it's kind of a sneak preview. It's not being published until June 30th. There's what it looks like. You've probably seen it. It's called Bears and Ballots, an Alaskan Adventure in Small Town Politics. It's about my 3-year term on the Haines Borough Assembly, beginning in 2016 and ending in 2019. And it was both inspiring, challenging, heartbreaking. There was a lot of, I learned a lot, and I think I contributed a fair amount to our community. And the book itself is a series of chapters that reflect on different aspects of governing, or at least some of the things that I thought were important. Talks about running for office, Robert's Rules of Order, civility. There was a recall during the time that I was in office, and I was one of the candidates, or the assembly members that were targeted for the recall. So there's that. And without that, there probably wouldn't really be a story here. And just some other things that I think may help people. And it's really done thematically. It's not so much this is what happened then and here we go. You're not going to be walking all the way through everything that happened on the Borough Assembly. Just some things that I thought would apply maybe to the wider world outside of Haines, and some of the things that happened that were worthy of telling a story about. I opened the book with a little quote from Sister Simone Campbell, who is the author of A Nun on the Bus, in which she says, the mandate to exercise our civil obligations means that we can't be bystanders who scoff at the process of politics while taking no responsibility. We all need to be involved. It is an unpatriotic lie that we as a nation are based on individualism. The Constitution underscores the fact that we are rooted and raised in a communal society, and that we each have a responsibility to build up the whole. The preamble to the Constitution could not be any clearer. We the people are called to form a more perfect union. So I think that maybe it sort of sounds highfalutin. It's not as much. There's plenty of stories in here about people and moments, and it's not all about politics, but I think it is really true to say that all politics are local, and ours are really local. There's also, for the first time in any of my books, there's a map in it. I don't know if you can see it, but it was drawn by Tresham Gregg, who was also on the Borough Assembly with me. And it was fun to have him make a map that is not as typical as our usual tourist maps in Haines, because it has things like the assembly chambers on it, the grocery stores, the senior housing, the preschool, the school, the places that play a part in the story. So it'll help get you oriented. And I thought before we started, I could, let's see, this might not be the one I'm supposed to be. I have one that I folded over some things. This Zoom world is a little different for me, but I'll try. I thought I'd share with you just a couple of thoughts from the book, just to give you a feel for things. And this is one for running for office, because people have asked how that happened. And this is just a little part of chapter 2. My son Christian thought I was nuts. My 4 daughters didn't encourage me either. When I said I wanted my grandchildren to remember how I jumped into local government, and that maybe I would be an example for one of them to do the same, that one of the little girls playing in my living room while I talked campaign strategy on the phone would grow up to be president. Sarah and Stoli, my daughters, who both live in Haines with their families, raised their eyebrows. It's the same look they give me when I suggest they take up cycling and ride with Chip and me. Have I mentioned that my husband Chip crashed just a few years after I was run over by a truck? So we both broken our pelvis. I nearly died. Chip's accident wasn't as bad, but just as scary initially, and like mine, involved an emergency medevac flight to Seattle. there's no hospital in Haines. Whenever I remind Christian to be safe, he laughs and says that we've been more seriously hurt riding bikes than he ever has in one of the most dangerous professions in the world, commercial fishing and surfing among great white sharks. He's in Australia doing that right now. And he actually is now too. Even when I wrote this, he was, and now he's living there. When I asked my oldest daughter, Eliza, an elementary school teacher in Juneau, who's currently taking a break to be with her young children for a few years and do the books for her husband's physical therapy practice, if I should run, she said no. So did JJ, who added, but if you really want to, go for it. That's JJ. She became an elementary school principal at 26. JJ is full in with all she does. Chip had been on the old Haines City Council for 15 years and also served one term on the Borough Assembly after the two governments united and formed the current assembly. I bet he could have been elected forever. He chose to leave because he realized life was too short to spend it sitting in front of disagreeable people. No one comes to meetings because they are happy with the government, he told me. Instead, he became the treasurer for the all-volunteer Haines Arts Council. They bring in performers from around the country, even the world, such as the Body Vox Dance Troupe, the Moscow Chamber Orchestra, and the Hot Club of Cowtown Country Jazz Band. The best part of being on the Arts Council, Chip says, is that if people don't like what we're doing, then they don't have to buy a ticket. And they never come just to complain from the front row. I didn't really hear Chip's concerns, and I brushed off my kids' warning about not running. I turned in my paperwork, a declaration of intent to run for office with 10 signatures on it, including Chip's, to the borough clerk as soon as the filing period opened at the end of July. I won't say I told you so if you're elected, and it's no fun at all, Chip said. Hardly a ringing endorsement. I will say he never did tell me I told you so. So that's nice. And I may read another little piece just to give you a feel of it before Kyle talks to me, because he has read the book already. This is from chapter 8, which is called Glorious Chaos, and it's about a situation that the assembly solved with a compromise, which meant nobody was 100% happy, but it also involved the longest assembly meeting in Haines history, which spanned the course of 4 days and nights. In politics, as in religion, making any concession is difficult. Demanding that the other side compromise is easy, as long as your side doesn't have to. When you do, it can mean abandoning values, standards, morals, beliefs, selling your soul to the devil. That's true, absolutely, on major moral issues, like what we're seeing now, like civil rights, the environment, or healthcare. I get that. Some things are sacred. There must be places where elected officials draw the line and say no, and quite frankly, as my campaign manager, Teresa, prefaces the points she wants to underscore, if I hadn't, then I never would have been elected. I will always compromise was no one's campaign slogan ever. Neither was, I will change my mind. So maybe I'll stop there, and I'll since Kyle is here, I want to see if maybe he has some questions. And again, I want to thank you all for coming, and I really want to thank Amy at the bookstore in Haines, and Carol Tyneman, and Dylan Chapel, and Tori Larson, and the people who put all this together, because I can't. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, so your house is suspiciously full of objects. I thought it'd be packed up by now.
Do you think I'm getting like the book came with an Australian passport so that I can go live with my son in Western Australia?
I thought it might have crossed your mind.
I hope not. I mean, I hope that it's a helpful story, and I hope the response in Haines isn't to run me out of town on a rail. And I don't want to go anywhere. I really love it here. And in spite of everything that happened during this time, I still do. And even with what's going on now. I mean, it's hard on a day well, now it's drizzling a little bit, but you know, like this morning when you're just outside riding a bike around here and not think that I'm just so grateful every day of my life that this is where I am. So I hope I get to stay.
Does this book feel different at all in terms of it's about to be published? This is your fourth book. How does this one feel compared to the other ones?
This is different because politics and the times, I think people get so angry about the smallest things, and especially if people don't agree with your politics, or even if they do and you haven't done enough for that group. So yeah, I'm a lot more concerned about it, and especially being in Haines, which is pretty volatile. To tell you the truth, I was actually I kind of felt like I should have given government a little more credit when we had done so well in our early response to COVID-19. And it seemed like, boy, that we were really on it and that everything was running so smoothly. And then it all imploded and the assembly fired a manager with many of the same characters involved that are in my book. And I was just like, oh no, here we go again. And I don't know why that happens in Haines. And that one really caught me broadside because I just thought that things had been going along pretty smoothly, but I hadn't been paying that close attention, I guess.
That what you just said makes me want to jump to a question I have later in the list here, but I'll just ask it now. When I was talking to you during the course of your term and in your book, there's sort of an element of disillusion with Haines and the people here. So just as this most recent manager firing shocked you, so did the recall, for example. Some of the people who you thought were your friends signed the petition. And then you write in one of your stories or chapters, Be Like Ray, that I guess I'm still a tad angry, which is pretty strong language for Heather Lende. So tell me more about that disillusionment.
I think during the time that it was happening, it was pretty rough. And I think I felt really hurt and angry the way that I was being treated, and especially because it was so difficult to refute any of it because it was all happening behind the scenes on social media and actually on a Facebook page that I was blocked from, so I couldn't even read it. And that was upsetting, to get screenshots from people or hear from things, or even to see something that somebody said about me, and then I walk in a store where they're a clerk or something and they're like, hi, how are you? And I'm like, am I going to pretend I didn't read what you just said? And then if I would say something, they'd get really mad. And I'd be like, well, what's going on here? And so there was a point where I was pretty low. But I don't know, I guess I do think it, and I write about this in the book, and maybe I'll just read it because I wasn't going to read this one today if I can find it. It was at the end of that same chapter, Glorious Chaos, and it's something that after a lot of thinking and to be quite honest, some counseling and going to church, taking a lot of long walks, riding my bicycle far, maybe I'll just read. Yeah, I kind of came to this conclusion, and this is what, for me, writing does. Writing this story actually helped me work through a lot of this, and I hope maybe it helps people in Haines when they read it work through some of it. But at the end of that chapter, where we'd had this solve this gravel truck issue, there was just this really awful moment where one of the people who was at the meeting got angry with me and suggested that that I hadn't been strong enough about the gravel trucks going up and down Young Road, and basically that how was I going to feel when one of my grandchildren were run over by one of these people driving the trucks that were owned by the godfather of one of my children. And I was just devastated by that. And for a while that really, I just couldn't get past it. But anyway, the conclusion that I've come to after thinking about a lot of stuff is that the story of how we shape our common existence, the rules that guide us, and the representatives who create them, and to some extent ensure that we abide by them, has some dazzling chapters. And they often contain pleasant surprises, but there are a lot of heartbreaking plot twists along the way. And I think that's like my life in Haines. I've lived here now 35 years. There's been dazzling chapters and heartbreaking plot twists. And I think that happens to almost anybody by the time you're 60 years old. And then what I want to say is, please don't take this the wrong way. But I believe that if we citizens, we voters, and we elected officials acknowledge this truth, our democracy will be healthier. I hate to sound like a grandmother, but I am one. And so, my dears, learn to share, take turns, and understand not everyone can have everything she wants all the time. Finally, and this may be the most important thing I will ever say about politics and life, accept apologies that won't be offered and forgive people who may never ask you to. And I think that's kind of where I've gotten to in this. But you're right, sometimes I am a tad angry and then I just ride my bike fast.
When did you decide to write a book about your time as an assembly person?
It didn't happen at the beginning. I figured I wouldn't be able to write about it, and I just thought I could continue writing something else. I was going to write about a book about community next, and community events, and going to them, of course. And then I got on the assembly and was under recall, and I wasn't really keen for going to community events. I was hiding sometimes because of the way I was being treated. And then I had my publisher and my agent. I would tell them stories about what was happening, but I didn't write about it. I didn't share it on my blog because I just didn't think people were interested in politics. And I don't write about politics. I write about family and life, you know, obituaries, the Chilkat Valley News. And there was so much politics, I just didn't want to go there. And then what happened was the recall. There was then a story there, and it seemed like a story that matched what was happening at the national level, with the divisions that were just automatic, you know, liberal, conservative, whatever. You're not with us, you're against us. And all of a sudden it seemed to fit. And so I started writing about it privately, and wrote just kind of how I felt. And that was kind of, there was a lot of things that I would never publish or even say out loud, but it helped me to get through that. And then I went back and said, well, how's this going to be a book? Like, what would interest anybody else? And so, but I also had to get the timeline straight and everything that happened straight. And that was a challenge for me because I'm somewhat disorganized. So I went back, and I went back through all the minutes of the meetings and listened to them. And then I wrote down what it was like being in those meetings and how I felt and what the different things that happened there. And I did each meeting up until the recall. I thought the book was going to end at the recall election. And then, so it would be cover about 9 months, my first 9 months on the assembly. But then after the recall election, it seemed that, well, how did it go? Like, how did we continue? And then after that, I had a little more confidence in the way I was working on the assembly. And I realized, well, I mean, maybe I can tell the story in a way that will resonate beyond Haines and that will help somehow in the current discussion of everything. So it actually ended up being fairly contemporary, going almost right up until the last assembly meeting or two. And I even was going to end it. I had ended it and then went to this meeting that was just, oh my gosh, here we go again. That was, I had said I wanted to end it thinking that everything was okay and it was all smooth. And just like Haines always does, there was a boom. And so it went around the corner that way again.
So what was it like? Was it what was it like writing about your experiences while also knowing you'd and making decisions as an elected official while also knowing you would be writing a book about it? Did you think about that?
No, because I was never really sure what part was going to be in the book or not. And there's so many decisions that are made all the time that it didn't, no, and it actually didn't really, because you know what it's like when you go to those meetings. You just have to make the best decision you can. And there's plenty of things I didn't write about, things that I just didn't feel would fit, or I just didn't share. I shared the things that I was comfortable with putting together. And so, and again, they were sort of thematic. So it wasn't the event in of itself. It was things that that fit civility or conflict of interest or Robert's rules, what we say and what we don't say. So I think there was cherry picking from different meetings. Once I was thinking that way, I would look back or look forward and say, what's happening here that will work? So there was that, but I don't think it affected any of my decisions particularly. I mean, because it just doesn't. I mean, it can't really. And I really didn't know what part of even what I was writing down would end up staying, because so much when you're writing gets edited out. I will say that for me, writing about it made me a better assembly person, I think, because I was trying to figure things out more closely. And I think that's what writing does for me. It helps explain what I'm thinking and feeling. And it also, for me, brings out my better self. I think I'm probably a better person in my writing than I am in person, because I think about it more and I craft it a little better. So it probably, once I knew that I was sort of observing it that way, I was probably a calmer assembly person, because I was like, I removed myself, my personality from it, and was like, wait a minute, this is like this crazy thing that's happening here, but how can I explain it? And that actually calmed me down, and I think helped me be a more confident assembly person, which may be what happens to you when you're reporting. You know, I think sometimes you're one step removed from the emotion of the moment.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to talk a little more about the recall, because there's the sort of the reasons why you were recalled that were on paper, but you wrote also in the chapter Be Like Ray, what you really believed it was about, or maybe a mix of the two. And a lot of it was that there was a group of people who just found your politics unacceptable and they wanted you removed. You want to talk a little bit more about that as it applies to Haines, but also nationally, because I think there is a real similarity between what happened with that recall locally and then nationally as how we engage in politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what happened when you looked even at the reasons people were, you know, they were struggling to find things that they could get us for, and the us was me and Tom and Tresham, you know, a journalist, a writer, and an artist. Even though we hadn't, on the things that they were mad about us at us for, we all hadn't even agreed on that, and other assembly members had been part of different things, but they weren't targeted. And I think especially Tom and I had been from the get-go, and then they just figured, well, I might as well get Tresham in there too, because he's, you know, a liberal, more progressive, and yeah. And so I think it does. I guess I was naive in thinking that that there was room for different viewpoints, or thinking that even when Tom and I ran for office, for instance, you know, we're pretty careful to be, I was anyway, honest about, you know, I support the library. I was very concerned about the clean water in the Chilkat River. I said I supported the Tier 3 regulations. I mean, I thought, well, if people don't like that, they won't elect me. You know, it wasn't like I wasn't being sneaky. trying to pretend I had a different viewpoint and then did. And Tom certainly is always quite vocal with his opinions. And so it wasn't like people didn't know what they were getting. And the same when they voted for Tresham over Jerry Lapp, who's been appointed to the assembly now. I mean, to me, that was a big surprise. But it happened. And right away, even I was told by recall organizers, the wrong people voted. And that sounds very similar to what you hear nationally on both sides. And it just seemed like it was going to become an all or nothing situation. And that was too bad, I guess. And I had hoped, I think, that all three of us, Tresham, Tom, and myself, have a pretty big history here, and Tresham even the longest, and that would count for something. And also that we have different strengths on the assembly, and that a lot of the decisions that are made, like most of the decisions that are made, have nothing to do with left or right or those kind of hot button issues, whether it's an environmental issue or a social issue of some kind or some arts funding, whatever. It's minor. I mean, you're figuring out, do you approve a new sewer and water project? Do you, make a budget amendment so that they can get a new computer? Or, the decisions that happen often don't have anything to do with a so-called ideology. And on the local level, that is often spoken as, something that is looked up to, that, well, at least on the local level, it's working. But even in Haines for a while, and maybe now still too, it didn't work. We didn't have that, what other towns apparently do have.
What makes Haines different in your mind? Because I'm a recent arrival in 2017, and I've heard nothing but that Haines has always been like this, or, has a reputation for being divisive. And you kind of struggle maybe a little bit with, did Haines politics trickle down to the nation or vice versa? Have you landed anywhere on that? I mean, in your 35 years here, has Haines changed?
Oh yeah, Haines has changed a lot. And I think that's part of it. And I think maybe that's part of what's happened in the country. I mean, Haines has changed pretty rapidly, and we're not really good at remembering our history. When I got here, it was the very end of sawmill town days. And now there's people who live here that couldn't even tell you where the sawmill was or what it was called. And then we became more of a tourist town, a retirement community on some levels. It's also more connected in the internet and television. All that stuff wasn't here back then.
But has the divisiveness changed?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's always been pretty divisive. And from what I understand, I mean, it was when we got here, the stories were, the environmentalists versus the sawmill people, and there were rumors of tires being slashed, or I don't know if any of those stories were really true, but there was a lot that had happened in the 70s and early 80s just before we got here, and then continued to happen on different levels. So there was a pretty, and it was always, it's always the same. Oh, but Haines always comes together when we have a problem, or if you're on the side of the road, someone will give you a ride, and you just kind of go, couldn't we just come together for a party, like a wedding or something nice, instead of always having a calamity? But at the same time, in some ways, I think our divisiveness is as frustrating as it can be, especially when you're in the center of it. It's made Haines the kind of town that it is, because we've never really been able to be one way or another way. And so we haven't charged off to be, like other towns in the region that are pretty, Petersburg has a way of being that everybody knows, if an issue came up, pretty much what the town would side on. Skagway does too. Wrangell does. Haines is like half and half on everything. And that may be something that has been good for us, because it's kept us kind of small and nice in some ways. I know that doesn't sound like it matches, but it also makes sure that there's a lot of room for new people, because you don't have everybody one way and everybody the other way. So new people can come and find a place here without being, you know, you can find a group at least, or friends, without being pushed into, you know, automatically, well, you're new and we're all here. There's enough diversity. And I think that's something. The other thing I have heard, and the more I think about it, I kind of think there might be something to it. But there was a fellow that used to live here that had he was kind of psychic, or could feel things deeply. And he always said that the reason Haines is the way it is because of our geography and our geology, and that we're at this crossroads, and we're at this, there's big mountains, and there's glaciers that are moving, and there's rivers, and there's lakes, and there's this tidal pull, and that it's always pushing and pulling one way or the other. And then we've got this iron deposit where we've got more gravity than like anywhere else on Earth practically. And it's right actually along Mud Bay Road, like at the corner of Small Tracts. And then there's that rocks there go way down and are very deep. And there's the iron ore deposit out by Cluckwan that, you know, spins around compasses, and there may be something to that it's just the place creates friction and motion, and that we're always a little bit going. We're not very settled. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's starting to make sense to me.
I thought it was the water, but yeah, your sounds more advanced. What was your favorite chapter in this book?
The favorite chapter in this book. I don't know. That's a good question. Of course, I like the beginnings sometimes, like going to Teneke with Teresa and running. I was so happy and I was so excited to run for office. And I wanted to make sure that people knew that. And I like the end too. I don't know. I don't think I have a favorite chapter. I think they all just, I think I like the book though. I like the way it came out as a whole, and I wasn't sure if I was going to, but I think it did what it could do. I think my favorite element of the book actually might not be a chapter, but my favorite element is similar to If You Lived Here. Between each chapter, I have manager and committee reports. And I just love those because, and picking them and where to put them, because, you know, in the middle of some of these very turbulent moments, then in between the chapters, there would just be stuff that, you know, government was working still. And it reminds people of all the things that government does. And even people who say they don't like government, you know, they want to have the road plowed or the ramp put in at the harbor, or attend an event at the Chilkat Center or the museum, or notice that, you know, I don't know, I could just pick one and just read it, just so you get a feel for what they say. Like children's, and these are real committee reports that come to the assembly. I edited them slightly for grammar, and for different managers gave them to us. They didn't always come in these clumps, but I picked the clumps. Children's librarian Holly Davis is back from the National Collaborative Summer Library Program's annual summit, where she shared ideas with librarians from all over the United States, Guam, American Samoa, and Micronesia. The combined senior center and Chilkat Valley preschool project is moving forward. They've started to lay the foundation and should be framing the addition soon. The water test for 20 residents of concern revealed no issues with lead or copper contamination. A new heating unit has been installed in the pool, making the water a consistent 81 degrees. And Parks and Rec is moving forward with the bicycle-friendly community application and discussed concerns about bears and humans in the Chilkoot River corridor. And I guess I really liked those, and I didn't write about each of those things, but by putting them in there, you saw like kind of what government really does, and that it's a lot of good, and we need it for our collective life, you know, for our community life. And it just kept going regardless of the tumult in the assembly. And to me, that was hopeful.
No, it's a great way to juxtapose some of the high drama with the
Like,
the
okay,
daily
we got
goings
to
on.
snowplow.
Hmm. Yeah, that was good. I like that. What was your writing process like? After meetings, would you go home and journal, or how did you write and organize?
No, I write in the morning, and I write usually between 10 and 2 every day. And what happened a lot was, if people know and they go back to my blogs, that I didn't have a lot to say during a lot of that time. And so instead, I would be writing things similar to a blog entry with the date, the weather. I would have photos so I knew where I was, and then just write about it, and as a kind of a rough draft, and just keep saving them. And then I had dates, and I saved like all the on my a lot of times on my agendas, I'd write notes or things, or especially public comment, stuff like that. And I just had a box at the bottom of my desk, and I just saved it. And a lot of it went nowhere. But then when it came time to, gee, is there a book in here? I could go back, and I had those things. And then what I did, this is, to make sure, that I double check, is this right? Did this happen then? And I'd listen to the meeting, go back when I was writing it or when I was editing, because there might be parts that I had written about, but then there was maybe something else that struck me as that might fit here when I'm talking about civility. What happened? What meeting was that? Where was it? And I'd go back through my notes and find it. And then sometimes I'd even listen to the audio of the meeting so I could hear exactly what somebody said, or go back to Google the Chillicothe Valley News or KHNS and find it. And it was interesting because so much of it was documented. I had my feeling part, but then I could go back and find the other parts. And even things like the weather, I could go back to the date and find it. You don't see that in the book because it's not that kind of book, but to help to reconstruct it, basically, that's kind of how I did it. And then there's just a lot of editing and going back and forth, and with my editor at Algonquin and Amy Gash, and I'd write, and I had some great chapters that never made it, and different, that just where it fit and what you decided to do, and what you really want to say. And there were things that, a year ago I thought were really important, and then took them out. The recall took up a lot more of the book, and then finally it was just like, I don't know, do we really need to spend that much time? So that was the decision, just to print the Ballets. And initially it was just going to be one chapter, and it's just one short one and one a little bit longer, and that's it. So we don't have it just this weight of it all the way through, even though I felt that for the time when it was happening. It just didn't feel good, and it's not what I wanted to focus on. You know me, I'm trying to find the good, so I just didn't want to go into the weeds on that too much. I also didn't write really at all about the manager hire process too much. Just, we hired a manager and let that go, because that was a whole nother thing that was very local, that didn't really seem to have a applicable lesson beyond that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, how you write for the local audience and a more broad audience. How do you balance those two things when you're writing about this town, the people in it, the people you see in the grocery store versus the general reader?
Well, I always assume, and I always have from the get-go, that everything I write, people in Haines will read. Even, I was writing for the Anchorage Daily News for years, and we didn't even get the paper here. Or I was on the old Christian Science Monitor radio, and I just always assume that. And I would never say anything that I didn't want people to know, I've said. So there's that. And I've been criticized for then not being, all frank or angry or saying stuff sometimes. But I live here, and I love the community, and I don't write in a way that I hope would ostracize me from that. I have found in my own writing that the more personal I make it, the more universal it is. And that might be a really weird concept, but it's true. If I write about the assembly, if I write about government, it's not that interesting. If I write about me and my feelings on the assembly and sitting up there at the dais and like your hands are shaking and what's going to happen next and do you make a motion or a second, that brings people into the story and then they learn more and I learn more. So it has to, and Haines is where I am and these are the people that I'm with. And so that's, I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I guess.
Let me ask another question related. Big Don.
Yeah.
You write about him as a friend early on, and then
yes, this is Big Don is the name that I have for Don Turner Jr., who ran the recall. And I called him that actually because to me that's always what I thought, because he's a big person in the front, but then also because there's Don Turner the third, and it gets kind of confusing about the different Dons. So it was just easier to have Big Don and Donnie. But yes, go ahead.
Well, do you think your relationship with him changed significantly?
Yeah. Yes.
How
very
so?
much. Well, I think for years, when we were building the new school and the library, and then when I was on the planning commission, he was just a fixture, in all these meetings and always talking to me and always coming and, come in my kitchen for coffee. We disagreed. Sometimes we agreed on things, but usually we wouldn't. But he was around a lot. And I just thought that was just, we would agree to disagree. And then what happened when I ran for office was just kind of startling, especially the ad that he ran just before the election, basically painting this broad brush, everybody at Mud Bay, bunch of liberals, you can't elect them, they don't tell the truth. And he'd been in my kitchen the day before asking me some questions. And I said, we're not going to agree on this, so it's okay. But then the things in the ad didn't seem to jive with that person. And so I realized that it wasn't a good relationship. And then right away, even from getting elected, suddenly you're going to get recalled. I'm going to get rid of you. And that was that. And I was like, what happened here? And so it did change.
Has he been in your kitchen for coffee since then?
No, nope, no. So, that happens. He built my driveway. He's he makes good roads and construction things. But I think the persistence with which he just went after us and ran the recall. And then I think, that it was just hard. And I don't, and I think he continues. He was part of the firing of the current manager, and vocally so. It's not like a secret. And so I think that's just tough.
Do you think your book can help Haines in any way? And did you want that to happen? Did you think it could happen?
Yeah, I think it could happen, because I think if people see themselves, and I think if or what we're doing to each other when it comes to our civic life, maybe it could be different. I really think that what'll make a difference, and I'm kind of heartened, in fact, by in one way, with things that are happening in the country, what'll really make a difference is the next generation coming in. If you look at this, so much of what's happened, it's all the same age. We've had a couple toes in with some other people, but the people who are still fighting are people who've been fighting for at least 30 years over many of the same things that people who are new here don't even know or care much about. And I think it's time for somebody else to do it. And you see, there's going to be a rollover in the whole town, I think, because the businesses are all owned by, if you look around, all of us, when we came here, were in our 20s when Chip and I started Lutech Lumber, or when Mary Jean, started Mountain Market, or Mike Ward, he was a kid when he started Hauser's. I think he was 21 or maybe 22. We were all really young. The fog cutter, the pioneer, Christy, and so we're still there, that same group. And you're going to see a turnover, I think, in businesses and in community positions, maybe, and then also it needs to happen, I think, at the assembly level. You've seen it to some extent in the borough office. There's new people like, Aleka is there, Will Hickman, that are different, that don't have that same baggage that you associate with. Even though we try, it's hard. So I'd like to just see newer people. And I think maybe what's happening in the country is going to inspire people. And they could just change the whole way it's done. If the system is awkward, it doesn't work. I mean, I look right now at Zoom. It's probably been the best thing that's ever happened to assembly meetings, because there's a whole bunch of people listening from home that never did before. And it makes me rethink how I thought about this opengov.com that Deborah proposed, and another assembly member, Sean Mady. I hope I'm not getting too into the weeds here for you all, but that we do this interactive thing, and all I could think of was, great, we're going to have this like Facebook type thing where people are going to be saying horrible stuff, and I don't think that's a good idea. But now I see Zoom meetings make it so much easier. My daughters are attending meetings for the first time, and they've got kids at home, and they've never been able to go. And they're telling me what happened at the town hall meeting, because they're listening and they're at home. And then they're participating. They're sending in questions on the chat or calling. And that might be a new way to do it around here. And it might be healthier than just, 8 or 9 people in the room, and the ones that are there are mad at you.
Well, we probably have time for one more question. I'm going to read a question somebody submitted here, and it relates to what we were just talking about. But after your experiences as an elected government official, would you encourage your children or grandchildren to run for office?
I absolutely would.
In Haines?
Yeah, because I still think you can change the world, Kyle. I mean, I think you can, and I know that just being there, I do think that just being there and saying things, even if you lose the battle, in the long run, you're probably going to win the war if you just stack it enough to be, and by battle, I don't mean particular issues in Haines. I just mean civility, and like listening to each other, and being willing to actually have an open exchange of ideas, and not just jump all over anybody if they throw some idea out there that might be kind of different. And suddenly that's who you are everywhere you go. I think that's the only thing that's gonna fix it.
Would you run again?
When I was writing this book, I said no. And then with all the latest stuff that was happening, I'd really like to someday, but I wouldn't do it anytime soon. I think I'd have to, the one reason I would do it, and I was thinking about this, is that if part of when I got on the assembly, what was really hard is that as new people on there, if the status quo, or if the people who've been there for a while aren't receptive, they don't want you there, whether it's staff or other assembly members or whatever, it becomes very difficult and discouraging. And I think, knowing what I know now, I think that while I do believe that assemblies should be now made up of more younger people, it helps if you had somebody there who sort of knows the ropes, that's on your side, that will help you bring out whoever you are, what you're trying to do. And so that would be the only reason I'd want to, but hopefully there's somebody else that can do that. I don't know if it's my highest and best use, because my heart's too much in it. I think the people that do best at politics are more pragmatic, and are calmer. They don't go home and cry about what happened at the meeting, or have their heart beat so fast you can hardly say anything. And I don't know if it's what I do best, but I sometimes watch what's happening. I'm like, I wish I was there, and then maybe it wouldn't have happened. I thought about what happened with firing the manager that I had been part of hiring, and I thought that was the best hire that we did, that and Aleka, the clerk. And I thought, if I had run again, that might not have happened. It probably wouldn't have. because there'd be a different makeup of the assembly. And so I felt bad about that, but you can't, I mean, that happens.
All right. Well, thanks, Heather. We've got about 5 minutes left. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming. I hope it wasn't too odd. And I do again want to remind everybody before Amy wraps it up that the views expressed by me and in my book do not in any way reflect the views of the board or the staff or the volunteers at Hospice of Haines. That this fundraiser is not connected to the book or politics. It's just an organization that's dear to me. So I hope you'll consider donating. And thank you very much, Kyle.
Thanks.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. I really hope that you found it easy to go to the fineartalaska.org to donate to hospice. And also, if you're interested in getting a book, please click on that link too, or you can always email me or contact the bookstore. And I certainly appreciate Heather being here. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Heather, and everyone who joined.
I didn't want to say anything. I had to leave a message.
Okay, is that it? Do we go away now? Is it time for a glass of wine? Thank you very much, everybody.
Heather, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
We're from Beaufort, South Carolina.
Oh,
Friends of Carol Tyneman's. And she suggested that we come and we hear the book review, and your book sounds really good. I'd like to know the whole story.
yeah, you're just going to have to read it to get the whole story, I guess.
Do you say anything? Well, it was great.
Thank you.
Definitely. Now we have to find out where to order the book. And fineartsalaska.org.
Fineartalaska.org. It should be on your screen now. Do you see it on your screen?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So are we the only ones out of Haines who don't live in Haines that are watching this?
Yeah, I heard there were people definitely from Chicago, from other parts of Illinois. There was someone from Texas here, Washington. Yeah, that's all I saw on the chat. Mostly from Haines, though, I think.
I'm here from Pennsylvania.
We're here from Colorado.
New Mexico.
Great.
Fun, thank you.
And thanks a lot, Kyle and Heather and all the folks at the bookstore and the Arts Confluence. Appreciated it. It was great. Enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
It was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maryland. All right. Idaho.
Maryland, Idaho.
And Amy, if we would like to make a donation to hospice, can we just go directly to Fine Arts Alaska or to the hospice website?
Well, I'm not familiar with the hospice website, if they have a link easily there, but on the fineartalaska.org, they do, on the Heather Lende event, there will be a link directly that you can just click on. It takes you there.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Heather, make sure you run again. You sound wonderful.
Thank you. That probably, I think we need one of my children too, or somebody else's children too. But thank you.
It's hard. It's hard. Okay.
Okay, everybody. Well, thanks very much for coming, and remember, when you do, if you want a personalized copy, you can get it through the bookstore in Haines. And but when you do get the book, I encourage you to get it from your local bookstore, because that's something that's really important right now to support your Main Street businesses at this time, and the community, and also the families of the people that own those stores. So please consider that.